Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here in Singapore. Thank you, Belinda, Xiaoyo, the whole team, and this school for hosting us today to this intense and beautiful meeting, gathering. So, just been introduced. I've been working in this role of leading an art space in São Paulo and advocating for Latin American artists in France, while being coming from a family that is half Japanese, half Portuguese. And to begin with, since we are so far away from my home, I think I have to give you some background about who Tomi Otake was. Tomi was born and raised in Kyoto in 1913 and moved to Brazil in 1936, following a huge Japanese diaspora to Brazil that started in 1908. So she went to meet a brother. She couldn't come back because of the war. She got married in São Paulo, raised two boys, and when her two children became teenagers, she started to paint at the age of 39. So against all odds, one could say, she, being a woman artist, a mother, an immigrant, not only an immigrant, but an immigrant from a country that had just been in war against the country where she was living, she grew up to become a very renowned abstract painter, leading figure in terms of how color can be addressed in abstract painting, and grew up to be a very iconic figure from the Japanese-Brazilian diaspora. Starting in the 80s, she started making a series of public monuments, public sculptures that became quite renowned. And in 2001, the Instituto Tomi Otake, that is named after her, was inaugurated. So, depending on how things go, we can come back to this. But the Instituto was created as an art space, a cultural center, an educational center that doesn't have a collection. It's not a museum. It's a place for exhibitions focused on modern and contemporary exhibitions from Brazil and from abroad, but also dealing with design, architecture, cinema, ecology, and so on and so forth. And it hosts, since it's been open, it has about 400,000 visitors per year, and used to organize 16 exhibitions per year, and today we do 8 programs per year, which allows us to go much deeper into the programming and the research and so on. And this institution is not focused only on Tomi. It refers back to her passion towards artistic freedom, artistic creation, and it's devoted to the possibility that other people that like Tomi are very unlikely to be acknowledged as great creators and great artists may have this chance in the future. But every 2 or 3 years, we organize a program or an exhibition or a publication on her legacy. And while we were doing that, we kept bumping into something that, to me, held a certain distance regarding her Japanese background, even though she came to Brazil as an adult, a young adult, so she had the whole Kyoto training and upbringing. She would constrain into being addressed as a Japanese woman, so on. And we kept wondering why was that. And of course, we going through historical materials, we could understand to which level Tomi has always been portrayed by the art critics and by the media, even when they wanted to to be very nice and say she was a great artist, they would attach her to these sorts of essentialism, exoticisms, and Japanese tropes that would, in the end, make the contact and the debate about her work very put her into the field of otherness. I think that's the best way to say it. And recently, we tried to reshape that conversation because we were not comfortable just leaving this away. So, okay, this was uncomfortable. This led to many biased readings, so let's not talk about it, and let's emulate some sort of universalism, like, oh, it's about shape and colors and forms. That was also not satisfying at all. But we cannot just say everything is about Zen and about the silence of Japanese women and this kind of imagery. It cannot be done anymore. So we reshaped the conversation around the Asian diaspora, and we recently started the Asian Diaspora Program, and it made much more sense because then we were not trying to capture whatever is Japanese into her work or existence or narrative, but we were looking at her experience in parallel to many other artists from Asia that have been in diaspora experiences. At this first moment, we started with Brazil, more specifically with São Paulo. So the program inaugurated with Chang the Refugee, an exhibition about this Chinese artist that worked and lived in Brazil for most of his life, that I curated with Yuji Rafael, who is here. With another show on Japanese Brazilian ceramists from the state of São Paulo, and another show on Hee Sub An, a Korean Brazilian artist from the Korean diaspora that started in the 70s. And this shift in the approach has led us to a different kind of understanding on how Tomiotake can be an example to us in the way we shape our researches and our conversations. And having done this introduction, I would like to tell you more about a project we did last year called Rehearsals for the Origins Museum, Ensaios para o Museu das Origens, which goes like that. So, as some of you might know, Brazil was on a military dictatorship since 1964 up to 1985. It was a long, cruel, and disturbing dictatorship. And since 77, 78, it was being re-democratized. So there was a process of re-establishing democracy that was long, overdue, bargained, and incomplete, ultimately. But since 77, people that were in exile were coming back to Brazil, and there was a certain sense of optimism. Okay, now we are rebuilding the country, rebuilding democracy. And as this was happening, we had a huge museum fire. The MAM, one of these institutions from late 40s, early 50s, that were responsible for modernizing the Brazilian art scene in relation to the international art scene, along with the São Paulo Biennial, the Museum of Modern Art of São Paulo, had a fire and lost more than half of its collection. And these are some scenes of the aftermath. So, as it happens, it's not the only fire in Brazilian museological history. You might recall 7 years ago, 2018, we lost the Museu Nacional just prior to electing Bolsonaro. So history kind of repeats itself. But here, when the museum was on fire, It had been such a symbol of resistance and creation. During the early period of dictatorship, it was a place of gathering of artists and creators that were against the regime. Then, after 69, no kind of resistance was allowed, so it went in a different moment. But it was supposed to be a place. This is the Brancusi they had after the fire. Today it's restored, but it's not the same. It became something else. But they still treat it, and the insurance value is the same of a Brancusi. But this is how it was, and it says, "Mom will be reborn." So, and the beautiful part of it is that people actually care about the museum. So people went to the street and made demonstrations. Some by schools took part, students, popular leaderships. And between all these people was Mário Pedrosa. Mário Pedrosa is arguably the most impactful, visionary Brazilian art critic of the 20th century. He was one of the very first Trotskyists in Brazil and grew up to be a leadership between the art community. He was not very young anymore. He was in his 80s something, but he had just came back from exile, from his second exile, and he joined the conversations, and he took a very important position that he said, you know, we shouldn't just rebuild the modern art museum we had, because we know the limits of that kind of structure. It's bourgeois, it's conservative, it can be a place of freedom for artists, but not for everybody else. We should aim higher. So he said, let's build the Museum of Origins, which would be a reunion of 5 different institutions. So he wanted to create this umbrella structure that would protect and foster the Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of Indigenous People, the Museum of Black People, the Museum of Popular Art. Popular art in South America, and particularly in Brazil, is unliterate art, but art that comes either from the suburbs or the inner lands, outside of the cities. But that was a very key category for modern art institutions that wanted to be international, wanted to be abstract, wanted to be up to date, but were lacking local authenticity. So they brought this idea of popular art as a way of keeping local. And in the end, many of the most important Brazilian artists are popular artists in the end. And the Unconscious Museum, the Museum of the Unconscious Image, which is a museum devoted to art produced in psychiatric asylums. So he was really expanding the conversation, and he was saying, all these museums, the Unconscious Image Museum existed, but was going through a hard time. The Modern Art Museum existed, but was going through a hard time. The Indigenous Museum existed, but was going through a hard time. And the Popular Art Museum and the Black People Art Museum were non-existent, even if they had some sort of background initiatives, but they were not formed as institutions. So if we build them, if they are together, they can lend each other their strengths and cover each other's gaps, and they can exist in community. Each will have their own collection, curators, public, audience, knowledge, but they will be in network, and they will share a center for creative and experimental activities. So we did this project last year, so we started just as Bolsonaro's government was ending. So it felt a little bit like it was a moment to look back at these ideas that were referring to a way of rebuilding the institutions in a democratic understanding of it. And we loved going back to, at the time, nobody really liked Mario Pedrosa's suggestion. The bourgeois that kept the museum open hated it because they wanted it to stay the same. And the artists of the time hated it because they just wanted the experimental open space. They didn't want to look into history and background and anything. It was late 70s. So it never happened, just these documents. So we wanted to go back to it. Why? Because we thought that the most interesting aspect of that was not to understand these 5 pillars as a new allegory of diversity in Brazil, etc., but as a very before its time vision of how empowering, fostering, and preserving cultural institutions can be a democratic strategy to a democratic country. So, and to which extent preserving, fostering this kind of institutions and putting them into conversation creates, foster the right for authority and is part of a politics of memory. So in a country like ours, we thought that Pedrosa was very before its time in understanding how strategic, how important are politics of memory, how impactful it is to what a country or a people or a community can be to set up the terms into which memories will be preserved, forgotten, connected, and reshaped throughout the time. And then what we did was we tried to update and expand Mario Pedrosa's idea. We started looking, we connected to more than 25 places of memory across Brazil. Some of them were museums, some of them were heritage spaces, community-based spaces, places that were devoted from archaeology to botanics, from, of course, indigenous, black, psychiatric context, the ones that Mario had already mentioned, but also to other kinds of institutions that were not there at the time, and going from the north to the south of Brazil. And we've met so many stories of resilience. Most of these places were created by one woman, one guy, a family, a community that produced it because there is a lack of institutional or national policy towards memory in the country. So these places were done because and despite Brazil, because of its vitality, because of the level of cultural commitment of the people, but despite the lack of institutional support or policy in any level, both private and public. And we put together this exhibition that was a sort of assemblage, not only of the collections or the archives and the histories that were taken care by these spaces, but also an archive of how these places were built, by whom, how, against whom, and in favor of what. And so these are just some views of the diversity of the subjects and the themes. This is a very beautiful place in Salvador, Bahia, that's called Acervo da Laje. It's a community-based grassroots space in the suburbs of Salvador that collects and curates and researches contemporary popular art in their community. And then it connects to Lina Bobardi, Mario de Andrade, and many other thinkers that thought about history and memory in the country. And we could spend hours speaking about each. I would just like to, I just took one example that I find very interesting in terms of how, when we look at such an example, not only in terms of collection or symbolic power, but also in terms of politics of memory, how complex the history of a memory place can be. So Museu do Índio was created in '53, and it was created at the same time the first indigenous reservations were being created in the central part of Brazil. So while the president was acknowledging the first indigenous reservations, there was this anthropologist that said we should make a museum of indigenous people in Rio de Janeiro because the way colonial history was produced in Brazil, we would be very proud of our mixed origins, how Brazil is black, white, and red, indigenous, European, and African. But in these narratives, since the colonial times, the indigenous would always be referred as something that belongs to the past. So, you know, indigenous are part of our constitution. They were so great. They were so connected to nature. They belong to Edenic past of the creation of Brazil, which was not the case. Being an anthropologist, Darcy Ribeiro knew there were living, existing communities and people and knowledge and cosmogonies in Brazil of that time as they are today. So we need to build this museum in the, at the time, capital of Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, to show urban community, urban populations, that the indigenous communities exist and they are very important and alive and they have a very strong culture. So at the first time, it was targeting urban populations and it was some sort of propaganda strategy in favor of indigenous rights and existence in the present. Then, throughout dictatorship, it became, well, as a side effect of creating this museum that had this mission, all national collections of artifacts, but also all national documents regarding indigenous lands came to Museu do Índio. It became the official container for documents regarding indigenous lands. So during dictatorship, there was a very active effort of taking away the few rights that indigenous communities had. And many, many documents were destroyed in order not to acknowledge indigenous property of the land. But then Museu do Índio was the place that kept copies of everything and created a document for the future that these lands existed and were indigenous originally and so on and so forth. And then in the reconstitution, the new constitution that was created in 1988, Brazil, with indigenous and black participation in the new constitution writing, created the national acknowledgement of immaterial heritage. So you have material heritage, architecture, paintings, sculptures, etc. But then you have immaterial heritage, like indigenous body painting, indigenous language. So this was created in '88, but it took almost 20 years to create the laws to implement that. And the Indigenous Museum, because of its researchers, closely collaborated with indigenous communities to create the files to prove that this immaterial heritage existed. And when they got the acknowledgement of the immaterial national heritage for their singing, painting, talking, etc., then these immaterial heritage acknowledgements became new documents to defend their land reservations, because they say, well, if you want me to keep my knowledge, I have to preserve my way of living, and my way of living cannot happen in Western cities. It needs the forest, it needs the river, it needs this and that and that. So you have to preserve the land for me to preserve the knowledge that you said was here, heritage. So this same museum, and then later on, I have to wrap this part, the museum collection also became a place where many indigenous communities like the Baniwa, that painted this ceramic. Baniwa women went to visit the museum to do reverse engineering in their ancestors' production to reacquire their knowledge about how to paint ceramics. So the Baniwa community had lost part of their vocabulary or lexicons of ceramics. So they visited the museum and produced a glossary of their own ancestors' knowledge and took back to the Black River, Amazon region. So the same place had all these functions, social meanings throughout history. And this goes well beyond acknowledging or not acknowledging that indigenous is a part of our background or our identity. So that's the importance of the politics of memory, because it's also alive, it's also an organism. So to wrap up, so we did this project trying to update and recontextualize and expand Mario Pedrosa's dream for a museum. And what we are doing right now for September this year, so if you manage to come to see the São Paulo Biennial, hopefully we will also be opening this, is a project in which we are trying to dream the dream of Edouard Glissant, the Martinican poet and thinker, for a museum, what a museum could be like. So Edouard Glissant had a personal collection that today is in Guadeloupe, that has never been exhibited, that he built throughout his life in close collaboration with expatriate or diasporic artists, mostly living in Paris, from Caribbean, from Latin America, but also from Eastern Europe and US. And we are bringing this collection to Brazil to show it for the first time, together with some documents from Glissant's writings and interviews and contemporary artworks, trying to imagine this museum of errantry. So in Portuguese, we say errância, like in French, errance, which sounds almost the same, but means the opposite of herança, which is heritage. So the Museum of Errância instead of a Museum of Heritage. So we started looking to origins, and now we are trying to look into Glissant's ideas as a commitment to movement, to detour, to contamination, to creolization, to everything that happens, as Yuchen very generously showed us earlier, when things get more complicated. And this is important not only for the sake of complexity, but because part of, according to Glissant, part of the goal is not only to protect our right to be complex and multi-layered and multi-identitary, but also to pinpoint that even what has learned to present itself as a very pure, mono-rooted culture is actually the product of several layers of conflict, mixture, creolization, and reshaping throughout time. What they did, in this case, the Western gaze, was to produce this fiction of pureness, which is completely arbitrary, because this is not the way humanity was produced or the planet was produced. And we are hoping this exhibition will start with the landscape of words and finish with the words of landscape, from La Paysage de Parole to Le Parole de Paysage, as Glissant would say. So that's the goal and the next step in our conversation. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Xiaoyu and Belinda for inviting me to this opportunity to actually share what we've been doing at MCAD for a while. So, when I started to think of this presentation early on, when Xiaoyu and I had this conversation last year, I had to think back to the moment more than a decade ago when I was asked to join the university, but not as faculty, but as director of the museum, which they already had called the Museum of Contemporary Art and Design. I remember asking myself then certain questions, quite informed, very organic questions about what it meant to actually set up an institution in Manila at that time. What would be useful for the art and cultural ecology of the location of Manila at that moment? In fact, what sort of contribution could be made to the larger art ecology beyond the college by an art space which did not have a collection? While we already cleared up the idea of what we could do and figured out that the non-collecting institution solution was to actually call it a Kunsthalle, a huge conundrum for a lot of museums in the Philippines in 2011 when we were having this conversation. The questions of usefulness, relevance, contribution, responsiveness, most of these were questions that I asked then, are things that we continue to periodically bring up with our team. Before I introduce MCAD to those not familiar with it, although I hope that a lot of the people from Singapore are, I'd like to share a short video which you can access on our site. This was made when we celebrated 10 years in 2018. In this interview, there are two people in the video. One is Marianne Pastor-Roses and Ed Calma. Marianne talks about her proposal for MCAD, and she and the architect Ed Calma talk about the characteristics of the space of the museum.
I was very involved with the design of this space. In fact, Ed Calma and I, and a number of other people in the initial planning for the building itself, were quite invested in the idea that the curator should be a leading force in the creation of the space. I'd like to add that it has been unusual for an architect and a curator to work side by side, as Ed and I work here in this project. And it began a series of collaborations with Ed Calma through the decade that followed. It has been a wonderful set of collaborations.
Create this school that could engage with the neighborhood because it's an evolving neighborhood. And we were hoping that the school would kind of gentrify it and respond to those streets along the sides and create some kind of activity, right, besides commercial activity. And I wanted MCAD to actually engage Dominga because it's a very scaled street. It's sort of a museum responding to that, a completely different scale.
So Marianne is a political and cultural theorist who also runs a small company that builds what she calls museums. At least the physical buildings, although I would argue against that, which more often than not she then leaves for others to shape. I thought it would be fitting to introduce MCAD from this point, establishing the conceptual kernel of MCAD as a laboratory within the building of the School of Art and Design. The museum is at its most bare. A high volume space enclosed by windows. Its volume contrasts with the narrow street from which this is what you see outside. And now this was like 5 years ago. There's now a huge building off to the right. The transparency of the glass allows for the city to enter the space with its chaos and contradictions. MCAD also is, in fact, part of the parking garage of 3 floors. So this is basically what the space looks like, bare. And this is the parking garage. This is the end of the space. Our ceilings have the capacity for heavy loads, and our gallery floor, being on the same level as the parking, has a convenient roll-up door from which vehicles can actually enter the gallery straight from the parking space. While none of this information is particularly riveting, what it does is highlight the parameters of the space and the probable conceit of future projects. Marian told me over lunch a couple of days ago that she continues to watch and wait from the sidelines for MCAD to bring in a truck or a tank or two, and maybe even stick a wing of a plane on the wall. The largeness of these objects that she picks lays bare the various registers of scale within MCAD's exhibition history. The scale of some of the works which have included in exhibitions have become key tangents for the display of contemporary art in Manila. MCAD sits on the ground floor of the Museum of Contemporary Art and Design, of the College of St. Benilde in an older area of Manila, and is part of the LaSalle educational system. We are a nonprofit and continue to be free to the public. All entry to the museum and to most of our programming are free to everyone. We are essentially a university museum with our key stakeholders being the students and the faculty. Its unique functionality in the Philippines, or at least in Manila, however, is that it is also a space for artists, both local and global, who are given the opportunity to produce projects with for some people, a lot of margin for experimentation. Thus, MCAD speaks through the typical conventions of exhibitions, exhibition making, and attendant particularities that surround their production. That is commissioning, for example, presentation through exhibition design. I wanted to show this to sort of situate. We found this video online. This is our street, and it's very rough and ready, but it doesn't sort of get people set for what MCAD looks like inside. So that is commissioning, for example, presentation through exhibition design, and interpretation, which is for us learning and public programming. These are not new ideas for those of us who have been part of the art institution machine for a while. But MCAD at that time was a fledgling space. And it had the distinct challenges of having to address these potential audiences, the students and the faculty of the college, but also, to my mind, a discerning local art public. I was not sure who this would be yet. I remember in our first opening, we had 50 people come. And we had a college that had, 12,000 students. But also but the opportunity to present the contemporary art without a collection mandate and outside of the market was then quite unique. It was important for us to shape the institutional identity of MCAD first. In retrospect, the formation of the institution began on several fronts, all of which happened in bursts within a very intense period. A sort of contrapuntal effort, speaking of music, but this one not so harmonious from its conception. A sort of contrapuntal effort to form ideas through exhibitions across localities, experiments in programming, formats, and knowledge sharing. Our local street Dominga and the college community are our closest audience. The kinds of events that we set up affect them directly. Traffic, large trucks for delivery of exhibition material, performances that take place in their spaces and locations. While it could be argued that contemporary art in this part of the world is unnecessary for some, art does add dimension that can address it, even if it complicates its existence. They have been, from the beginning, the constituents of the barangay, I'd like to go through some of the projects that we have that actually engages the people from outside, and they come all the time to MCAD without having to buy tickets. So they can just walk in, totally no need to dress up and be formal. We have actually been very engaged with a public school that's found on our street. And these are some of the programs that they actually come to. Open house is one of the programming activities that we have at the museum. And it is actually for the street. Our community, there are 3 barangays. They're called sort of like little districts in the space, which we deal with on a weekly or at least a monthly level, where we have programming directed for them. So we engaged through them directly with Open House, an engagement that has become even more urgent for us due to the current crisis of our education system. So we produce programs for the college, for the public school on our street. This responsiveness to the system also allows us to bring on an audience that works with artists whom we engage with for our exhibitions. One of them I would like to point out is Michael Lin. I don't know if you recognize him. He's actually riding in one of the tricycles, and he worked with us on this project where he engaged these tricycle drivers with an exchange of their covers, which was of course very, very important for them, because this gets actually very it wears down very, very quickly. And this became like art going through around the streets of Manila for at least a year or 2. And this was the actual work. And we used the ramparts from the parking space where the tricycle drivers could actually enter and pick up anybody who wanted to use them and ferry them to their destination. So this is the work by Michael Lin at MCAD in 2015. So this is one of the most significant projects where the tricycle drivers brought in their work and their livelihood into the museum, and they have continued coming to the museum as audience. And this sort of engagement for me has been incredibly special, because it has, this was like, I don't know, 2016. I mean, like that's 10 years, more than 10 years ago. And they have brought in not just themselves, but the family to visit and see what the next exhibition is. We've also done projects, for example, just during the pandemic, which was the car park, a drive-in theater on our street. So what we did was because nobody could come out because we had really bad lockdowns in Manila. So what we decided was we decided to bring out the work and have a drive-in theater. But those people who had cars could come in, but we also provided seats so people could just walk in from the neighborhood and engage with the work that we were doing for that particular moment. Currently, we have an exhibition by the Another area we considered as our locality, aside from the barangay and the street, is our engagement with artists, our locality, across all geographies. Currently, we have an exhibition by the Filipino artist Marietta Niguchi, and this is her current project, whose project led us to work with a local workshop to produce her sculpture. She's the second solo exhibition by an artist, a Filipino artist, after Pasita Abad in 2018. Several projects in the past, this is Paul Pfeiffer work. Several projects in the past also allowed us to harness the depth of engagement that the college and the community could offer. Paul Pfeiffer was one of the key and early artists who worked with us on an exhibition that opened in 2015. The project was initiated through conversations all 2013 and ended up with 3 commissions, which was very, very difficult for a team of 7. Works that involved everything from working with woodworkers to working with students who created a choir, from a speech class, and the production of a video work. This Paul, and this is them producing this maquette of the Iglesia ni Cristo Stadium in Manila. And so this is fantastic. Which Paul decided to put into work into a video, which took around 3-4 months. Aside from the woodworkers of Irmurio, for Maria Taniguchi, several workshops for Paul. We also worked with the local workshop of weavers for the Haegyang exhibition for her rattan sculptures. This was actually quite challenging because it happened during the exhibition, but we did produce something like six. I have a message from. Yeah, there are 6 sculptures that we made through the pandemic. These exhibitions created and continue to create tangible connections to local working groups and to local practitioners, bridging the gap of art production and artistic engagement in the local sphere of Manila. And this, which would have otherwise remained invisible. Well, that's not all. While not all of the artists' practices can do this, we also try to create opportunities for other spaces, exhibitions, and thinking to create opportunities where we could initiate spaces across the Philippines, actually, not just Manila, where we could connect art practice with local community. So this we started MCAD Commons in 2016, and we started this with a work by Chang, the Library of Unread Books. Oh, this is not it, this one. And we had it in Chinatown. This is because MCAD is only really just one space. Not everybody can come and visit. We thought it would be interesting to actually bring the work out. So this is the Library of Unread Books in Escolta, in Chinatown, and it was quite successful. So many people actually started coming to this this space, this old building, Art Deco building in Chinatown. And then we worked on another project in Lucban, Quezon, which is around 5-6 hours away. In Quezon, Lucban, Quezon, in a space called Project Space Pilipinas, which is actually a small, sort of like a hallway. It feels like a hallway. It's a very, very small space, and it's fronted by a sari store. It's also, if our street is small, that street in Lucban is half. And there's like a sari store where they sell sweets and all of these sorts of things. And behind it, when you enter, there's a space, a project space. And we worked with this artist, Leslie De Chavez, to produce this, what was it? It was a video exhibition of global number of artists in Lucban. And then the next one was we worked in a space in Manila, in Bacolod as well, in Orange Project, which is all the way in the south. So what we try to do is we try to create all of these instances of engagement across, in spaces who are open and engaged to working with contemporary art and with MCAD in particular. This particular tangent supported our reflections on moving away from the tyranny of our gallery space, and give inflections to art practices which could easily have been contained within the architectural space of MCAD, but could function and live in another space and context. So I wanted to also speak about how I have someone in my team, her name is Mary Ann, has been in charge of our education and learning program for quite a while now, and she has actually created such great moments for our programming outside of the museum. So one of the key works that she does, aside from working with the local space of Dominga Street, is that she has this amazing program of Filipino Sign Language, because the college has one of the few deaf departments in the Philippines, the only one, I guess. And we engage with with the FSL projects, programming, tours, etc., for all of our exhibitions and programming throughout the year. So the next space that we're starting to occupy is late last year, we hired a new deputy director. And these are moments where every time we bring in a new person into the museum and into the organization, we take it as an opportunity to actually start to move back and reflect on what we are doing. Are we still working on relevant projects? Are we still, as a space, relevant? What are the tangents that we can start moving from to become responsive to the particular moment? There are many, many instances in our history where we have had to speak to specific political circumstances. I've not mentioned that here. But I think the entry of a new person in an organization allows us to actually stop and reflect on what we should be doing. One of the things that we have decided to work more on is this idea of the production of knowledge, and as knowledge producers. And one of these things that we've decided to work on more intensively is to start producing books and publications. So we've produced works by we've always done exhibition catalogs, but I think what we will be doing more in the future would be to put together books, anthologies, monographs of artists, thinkers, and we started it off with a work by Marianne Pastor Rosas, a collection of her writings called Gatherings, political writing. And I wanted to end this talk, they've given me the sign, of a quote from the anthropologist Mary Douglas, who wrote a book entitled How Institutions Think. And she says that institutions are largely explained through culture. And I think it is the culture of your team, whoever your team will be, Belinda, that will shape the sort of organization that you have in the future. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Xiaoyu and Belinda, for inviting me. Thank you, everyone in this room, and Tanoto Art Foundation as well. Is it okay? Thank you. Oops. It doesn't play. So I have a music file. Can you play that for me, please? On this slide. Cannot? It's an audio file. Okay. Okay, it cannot play. Is it? Okay. Okay. So before I discuss this painting, we are going to see a painting later. I would like to outline the topic of our conversation today briefly, which focus on the concept of organization, specifically in the early 19th century in Thailand, during which the monarchy held authority over other organizations and led the monolithic organizational entities of the country. On the screen is King Rama IV, the King of Thailand during early 19th century. The music you just heard is Flying of a Bumblebee, composed by Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. I would compare this to the idea of organization. When faced with danger, a swarm of bees collaborates in the organization. Bees that are close to one another understand their roles very well. As they work together, they systematically divide their responsibilities. The motivation to survive drives the instincts of all living things. Organizational cooperation within the ecosystem functions effectively when there is a threat, or it may otherwise fail. So from the 19th century in Thailand until now, organizations including hospitals, universities, bureaucracies, and one of the monolithic organizations is the government, entities function as the state structures that rely on power of monarchy under the hierarchical system. This hierarchy is built on the legitimacy of issuing order, and individuals need to comply. That's how institutional organizations are different from communities. The authority structure relies on legitimacy. Without the power structure may weaken. Punishment is the instrument to conduct. Consequently, punishment for disobedience must also be founded on legitimacy. Like you cannot order someone, command someone to do something without legitimacy, right? So according to Max Weber, a German sociologist, the legitimacy can be like possible three sources of possibility to create this legitimacy. And related to the early 19th century in Thailand, this is how King Rama IV gained power over Thai communities in the structure of organization. So the first that Max Weber refers is the charisma of the leader. Charisma of the leader can be source of legitimacy. However, quality often thrives within a small group of people. I would compare this with the Planet of the Apes or Dune, if you watch that movie. And you can see those who became leaders possess a certain charm and distinct character. For example, the talking ape in the Planet of the Apes, who speaks English and better than me. And the most handsome young man in the universe in Dune exemplifies that charisma. So you can be handsome and you get charisma as well. So the charisma can captivate a large audience but cannot sustain itself indefinitely. It needs myth or story or narrative to evolve in a myth. This idea is illustrated in Game of Thrones, where the Targaryen family is the only legitimate bloodline that can control the dragons. And we can also see that the myth or narrative was really powerful. Together with charisma, it can create so many things. And the myth or the narrative can be varied, not just this riding dragons, right? For example, like the communism. When the comrade asked Lenin what communism is, he was very confused. So Lenin replied, communism is where everyone can access electricity. So his envisions his vision envisions the power path of Soviet Union through technological advancement, which becomes a belief for the country's members. Maintaining the legitimacy of punishment is essential to creating the myth. The authority structure relies on legitimacy. Without it, the power structure may weaken. The people within the organization believe in this legitimacy, which is another key component of the authority structure. Legitimacy can be passed down through generations or influenced by myth to firm the belief. Another example is the story of Siddhartha, like the Buddha before he became a Buddha. Is a clear example. So throughout human history, when we have needed to organize large societies with many members, we have often relied on stories or fiction. There are fiction that humans have created and that a significant number of people believe in, allowing them to agree on how the fiction functions. This is evident in the case of religion. So this is how King Rama IV led the Siamese kingdom during his reign, combining his charisma, the story of the myth that he created, and then the religion. As you can see, referring to the bees, when the swarm of bees has been attacked, so it was immediate functions at one whole organization. So we need to consider the threat that prompted Siam to shift the whole perspective as an entire organization. It needs to bring back to the First Opium War in 1839 to 1844, which was waged between China and Britain, followed by the Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, also known as the Arrow War or the Anglo-French War in China, which involved Britain and France fighting against China. The opium trade continued despite the conflict, resulting in China having to compensate Great Britain for its losses. As part of the peace settlements, China ceded Hong Kong Island to the British and increased the number of treaty ports where the British trader could operate. So this painting was created in 1850s. During that time, a significant period in history on April 18, 1855, which marked the Barring Treaty, was signed between the British Empire and the Kingdom of Siam. This treaty primarily aimed to liberalize foreign trade in Siam. It was signed by 5 Siamese plenipotentiaries, including Wongsathira Sanit, one of the king's half-brothers, and Sir John Baring, the British envoy and colonial governor of Hong Kong. Siamese society during that period followed a monarchy authority structure with various myths, most importantly the myth of the king, along with a fusion of Buddhism, Hinduism, and animism. Rama IV attempted to transform society by introducing scientific ideas alongside with his own scientific endeavors. He was an expert in calculating astronomical events, with his most notable achievement being the calculation of the total solar system eclipse that occurred on August 18, 1868, during his time as a monk. So this is part of the painting that he really demonstrated himself onto the painting. So he met among artists, painter named Kroy In Kong, and he commissioned Kroy In Kong to make mural painting, replace the Buddhism tradition mural painting. In the painting of Kroy In Kong, the change in the worldview that shaped cultural thinking from Traipumi system of thought, a vertical perspective that believes in the existence of heaven, human world, and hell. So in Buddhism, a traditional mural painting, it was flat and two-dimensional, and it was followed by this idea of three world, which is the vertical one. So the solar system has been applied the Tripumi system has been eliminated, creating a more realistic landscape using perspective technique, which are unusual for Thai traditional mural painting that was previously created using two-dimensional method. So this is the interior of view of the temple at Wat Barom Niwat. A continuous painting span across 4 panels, creating an illusion of endlessness. The top section depicts the solar system with the sun positioned at the entrance of the temple to indicate the east. A lunar eclipse at the back marks the west, followed by representation of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Earth is not included because it is the painting itself, and Pluto is absent as it had not been discovered yet at that time. The light on this painting shines toward the luna from the front side to the end side, and the shadow is cast on the opposite side of the sun. So this is really some kind of like a very realistic method in terms of practice. So this is the top section map. This is the below section map. In this part of the painting, the sun appears at the top and all the angels are depicted in the initial form of King Rama IV's name. When we examine the entire painting, we notice that all the figures depicted are all white people dressed in Western clothing, engaged in various activities. It's apparent that the artist chose to represent only white individuals in this work, whether this choice reflects a genuine admiration for Western culture or a strategic decision to appeal to the dominant powers of that time, specifically Britain and France. Remains uncertain. However, there is a small section of the painting that the artist deliberately marked differently, featuring 2 characters, 2 of whom are beggars who appear to be Thai. So that I think the guy throwing a coin to individual begging for money. So in this case, it's already happened with Malevich, I guess, like when he kind of hide tiny part of his square while he ordered to make some design for communist clothes, that kind of thing. So each panel section divided into metaphorical of rooms and presents a different depiction that the artist extracted from the inscription in the Buddhist Tripitaka. So this is the only Thai person in this whole entire pictures. So the painting divided into different rooms, but it's followed by this unfinished circle, which was really a very Eastern tradition, kind of like infinite landscape. And sorry. Okay. So they have 12 rooms. I picked just 2 rooms because it will take more than 1 hour, I guess. For example, this section, inscription written in Thai and can be translated in such. This room serves as a simile for a shore on one side, representing a place to refuge from danger. However, reaching that shore is challenging due to the vast ocean that separates it. This ocean is full of dangers, making it difficult to cross over to safety. In this scenario, there was a clever man who prepared a boat out of compassion for the people who needed to reach the shore of refuge. He constructed a large boat for them to board and then used it to transport them safely across the ocean to the shore of safety. The simile can be interpreted as follows. The shore of refuge symbolized nirvana. The clever man who built the boat represents the Buddha, who preaches the religion and taught practices for people to follow. The boat itself symbolized the teaching of the Buddha. The people who boarded the boat at successfully reached the shore of refuge represent the noble individuals who practice correctly and attain their path and fruit. They cross over the safety, attaining nirvana and freely themselves from all dangers. Additionally, nirvana can be likened to a body of water that is free from danger. However, swimming there is difficult because an ocean blocks the access, filled with various dangers. The Buddha is likened to a person who built a boat to transport people across to safety. The boat symbolizes a set of guidelines, and those who successfully reach the shore are comparable to the noble individuals who have achieved their path and fruition. So this inscription presents quite irony in contrast to realities at that time. During 19th century, the activity of the oceanic activities during that same period, which my work, Golden Teardrop, also addressed this era, specifically relating to the sugar industry from 16th to 19th century. Within the demand for sugar significantly fueled the transatlantic slave trade, during which an estimated of 10 to 12 million enslaved individuals were transported from Africa to Americas, primarily to work on sugar plantation. This harrowing journey was known as the Middle Passage. The transatlantic slave trade occurred from 16th to 19th century and was a major segment of the global slave trade. It was so contradictory or irony to this painting. So this is another quite important painting, a part of the painting. So this room serves as an analogy. There was a pond in Bokharani. Bokharani is the city, a very ancient city in India, filled with many kinds of lotuses. Among them, one lotus flower grew larger than the water, more beautiful than the others, and emitted a wonderful fragrance that spread in all directions. Many people came to admire this magnificent lotus flower, delighted by its scent. Bees and bumblebees flocked to collect the pollen. The analogy here is that the big lotus flower, like the Buddha, was born into the world with exceptional qualities that radiated everywhere. The fragrance of the lotus flower symbolized the Dhamma, which was taught by the Buddha. The people who admire the lotus flower, along with the bees and bumblebees seeking its pollen, represent the noble ones that have attained special Dhamma, and they have listened to the Dhamma summon and found guidance in it. In summary, the Buddha is akin to a lotus flower whose captivating fragrance spreads far and wide. The scents of the flower represent the Dhamma, while those who come to appreciate it are like the noble ones who have reached the path and fruition through their understanding of the Dhamma. So this combination of Buddhism and scientific epic, along with the introduction of exclusive Western influences, challenged that Thai society at that time, although it seemed to create a clash of different beliefs and cultures. The sophisticated blending of those elements did not result in rejection, and this you've seen already from Arya's work that Jones present. Thai people were so happy to see something different and make fun of it all the time. So, but it was really weird. I mean, because this was like almost 200 years ago. And instead, people enjoyed the story conveyed through painting, and they were eager to embrace them. Some may view this approach as cowardly, especially since other societies fought fiercely against British and French colonialism. However, Siam, under the leadership of Lama IV, chose a peaceful and submissive strategy. So when it comes to colonial study in Southeast Asia, we don't include Thailand because it was not officially colonized from anyone. So but when people ask, we can tell that the way we survived was a coward way, a submissive way. Anyway, I think it's fine because it was so dangerous, right? People coming to kill you, your family, and then you were like, I want to fight back for my country. But instead of that, they were just like, I will be you. I will become white people. It's literally like that because after Roma 4, we had this policy, actually, half top wearing Western clothes and half bottom wearing Thai, that kind of thing. So Rama IV, he also created a replica of his own king regalia offered to Queen Victoria. Sorry, where is it? So in this painting, you will find all the fascinated, like White House, train from Manchester to Liverpool, hospital, but it's all white people, you see. I'm not lying, you see. They're all white people. They are all white, except that the three guys. I was so happy to discover that. No, it's true. No, they are all white, literally all white, with the pigment of the color, you see. It's not yellow, not brown, it's white. When he did that wonderful project with that painting, and it included all white people and shocked Thai people at that time, he also created a replica of his own king's regalia. It was really important, right? In the Western culture, it was really important because Western culture, they were so crazy on like the throne, the crown, and so on. In Eastern culture, it was not that crazy. A crown was actually received by that tradition from Portuguese people who wear hat, turbine. No, sorry, not Portuguese. The Middle East people who wear turbine, and we received that culture and create our kind of like crown and combined with Indian culture and so on. So for him, he thought that Napoleon III, right, which is who was just robbed the position, kill the emperor and become the emperor himself, but he came from a commoner. So the king thought that it would be great to offer something that represent the symbolic of the king. So he made a replica of his own king regalia and offered to first Queen Victoria in 1857 and second to Napoleon III in 1861. Napoleon loved so much, and he stored it in the Eugene Empress room at Fontainebleau Palace. So he see that at that time, the third most powerful country at that time was the United States. So he wrote the letter to Abraham Lincoln offering 3 elephants, but Lincoln was like crazy, and he replied back that we are in a very cold country and the weather was so like up and down. So he didn't receive that 3 elephants, but instead of that, Rama IV sent 3 elephants to Paris for the World Expo. And during the Civil War in France, the elephant was killed and put it in the butcher shop, and people eat that elephant meat. Right? Ew. So I did some work that related to this kind of thing. So this is my work, represent a copy of his crown from the collection at Fontainebleau Palace, where the crown of Rama IV display inside Eugene the Empress. So this particular painting is very important and really significant to think about how the whole entire organization has been shifted their perspective from one kind of perspective into another perspective in terms of survive, because it's been treated by the most powerful Western country, the Britain and the France at that time. So the painting served as a guide for understanding how art envisions society's survival in the face of threats. We discussed the 19th century, a time when organizations relied on an authority structure, particularly the monolithic power of the monarchy. During this period, humanity inflicted harm on one another using military technologies to kill, plunder, and destroy. What challenges are we facing today? As the war continues, we are confronted with nuclear threats, dangers related to the conflict, economic instability, a technological risk. This situation highlights how our destructive tendencies could lead to the mutual annihilation. However, it seems that in our pursuit of power, we are also exploiting nature to the point of destruction, which may ultimately result in our own demise before we have the chance to kill each other. So this is related to, I wanted to promote a little bit of my Thailand Biennale. I'm currently serve as one of the curator and artistic director with David Tay for the upcoming Thailand Biennale. We draw inspiration from two distinct anecdotes, which is related to, this is 19th century when the whole entire organization has shifted from one to another. But now we realize that we cannot harm each other because we had no time to kill each other. And technology cannot help us. We thought that technology could help us to control nature and so on, or protect us and so on. So it's impossible now. Nature will take back and technology won't work. And in some kind of like future fiction that said technology will kill us, I don't think it's going to happen because we will disappear before that. So the distinct anecdote that I refer to the Thailand Biennale came from two very wise person, a very clever person, one Bernard Stiegler, which he put it in his Technique and Time and referred to this Greek mythology, Prometheus and Epimetheus, who ordered to given qualities to all creatures, but forgot to give to human, and then gave human fire, and then become started off our techniques and tools and kills us nowadays and so on, which is related to the objective time, which is the time that we can count, like the clock time. I'm going to finish soon because my time is up. And the second anecdote is from, I think you may read this through internet widely nowadays. Margaret Mead, American anthropologist, when her student asked her, like, what was the sign of the first human civilization? And she said what? She said the first sign of human civilization was from the bone, the fracture that broken, but joined back again, and explained later that in the ancient animal time, even human or other animal, if your leg break, you won't be able to survive. So the first sign of a human civilization was when one human share time with other human and help until that human heal and survive. So this is two kind of concept of time that I put it in this Thailand Biennale. And the title of our Biennale is Eternal Kaupa. Eternal means eternity. We took it from the view of the sunset at the Lampomtep in Phuket, which is represent eternity. In our aesthetic history, we always compare love to this eternal return. And then Kaupa is the concept of time from Brahmanism, which is one lifespan of the whole universe, 4.32 billion years to be exact. So these two ideas was really related to nowadays, that when we have no time to think about how we will enjoy our life in the next day and to our children in another generation and other generation, because our time is almost finished by our own self. And to bring that idea of time that is not perpetual is the key, and also to bring that idea of time, which is the objective time that we so much rely on every day, and anxious in every our everyday life, how much money that we could gain this month, and we will pay our mortgage exactly at the same time. Otherwise, we will get like interest and so on. That objective time, but we need to care also some kind of subjective time, like time inside you, time in your mind, and kind of work it through together. So this Thailand is also talks about this, the quality of when you wanted to understand how people living together in a very different. We are not talking about color different, race different, class different, or occupation different. We are talking about they are just like us human that busy doing something, but they are doing something in different kind of time, like me, you, or people who are take care of the toilet now, right now. So, yeah, that's my Thailand promotion. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. We do the roundtable for like, I think, half an hour before Yuchen will do her wonderful performance. When Arin was talking about time, I was kind of also thinking about the times we are living in, and I think that's very important, especially while thinking about a new institution. And there's currently that idea floating around about the Polythene, which is basically the idea that we are living on a very, very strange tipping point. And it's rather obvious. We basically have reached a tipping point in climate change last year with 1.5 degrees of change. We know we very soon will reach tipping point in population. We have globalization is also at a very, very strange place at the moment, with two, very soon, three superpowers fighting it. And most of all, in computer power, we have reached a time where we or Silicon Valley or whoever has basically developed a machine that is smarter than us, a machine that knows how to speak German without it having been taught how to speak German. So we have AI. So all these three things come together. And we haven't really figured out how to negotiate that. We don't know the rules of AI. Nobody knows. It's only obvious that the Americans and the Chinese are going into a competition that will be very interesting in the best of words, scary in the worst of words. We know that we have to find answers that are based on morals, on politics, and on realities. And going from that very macro level looking, I think looking through all of us sitting here, that is actually what art spaces are pretty good at, right? Or what art spaces, independent spaces, alternative spaces, universities. And I think we have proven that in the last 6 hours. We have heard about globalization. We have heard about time. We have heard about different ways of doing exhibitions, of bringing people together, of negotiating things. And so, but we also know that in certain places, like here in Singapore, art spaces unfortunately decrease. But we also see other places where things are happening. But with that urgency in mind, I think I would like to ask the panelists first about that urgency. So, I mean, you all three run non-collecting institutions, which is very nice. But obviously the Philippines, I say Bangkok, but Phuket, and which is actually the Thailand Biennial, and your institutions, they are very, very different ideas, different audiences, but let's talk about urgencies. What are the current urgencies? Joselina, sitting furthest away, maybe you.
I mean, yeah, thanks so much for that question. But I'm wondering in MGAD at the moment, or the Philippines, for me, I think is one of the urgencies, of course, is the need for more art spaces. You know, I speak from my position as working from a space, but this is also because there are very few other spaces that are able to show the sort of work that we can engage with. And I think that locally in Manila, there is that urgency to have more. But also, and to realize that there is that need to expand sites where contemporary art can be shown outside of the market and outside of well, I would like to say paying institutions. But this also, of course, comes from initiatives like, for example, Tanoto, where you have, I guess, nobody really talked about it, but the idea of funding space is something that nobody touched on, what I think is incredibly important. But there is that need, there's that necessity for private funding or even government, because of course in the Philippines there's none. That is not going to happen at all. It has to come from private funding to actually open up spaces for contemporary art to exist. That for me is, I think, is what is urgent at the moment in Manila. Of course, there are other things like politics and, you know, and that's totally different space altogether. But at least from where I sit and from where I speak from, I think there needs to be more spaces, because then this allows for art to exist and to complicate what's happening currently in society. So I hope that's...
So for me, when I was in Phuket, I thought that even like 5 years ago, when I thought that I would do something in contemporary art, something great, something change, something value. So this project is operated under the government, is a public money, right? So we need to be in very good conscience that we are going to spend a lot of money, which is the money from different classes of people who contribute their tax. And so focus on that, we may think that, for me, the most urgency kind of case that happened through this Thailand Biennale, and especially in Phuket, was not to think under that very dominant power of capitalism, if I say, which support me and, you know, like you and everyone here, like pay salary by my work and so on. So it was so different kind of way of thinking, or to put it in my conscience, when I don't receive that money from capitalists instead of the government, which is the public money, which is the money from everyone. So when I go there, I didn't expect to change them, right? If I expect to do something, pursued on my way of life, which is maintaining by this kind of, you know, like capitalism support and so on, I would maybe expect to change their mind, make them look through lens of contemporary art and so on and so on. So when you look at that presentation Joan show with the Aria's work, it's always the same. You know, like they don't have this kind of language of communication to the contemporary art. Contemporary art for me, for us, is so universal. No, it's not universal. It's so unique. It's so different, and we cannot change their perception. You know, like we go there and say, this is contemporary art. They don't care. So the most urgency case for me is how that I could embrace them, you know, like, and work with them. So we are working with different kind of aesthetic and focus on how they spend or consume that aesthetic, like enjoyment, like they watch a lot of this traditional music, which is not contemporary art, it's ancient, but it's so enjoyable. And for them, this is the most enjoying moment that keep their life and spirit alive. So this is the case that I think working in that different location, especially in Phuket, and we need to also bring contemporary artists there. I also need to tell them, to provide them this information that the contemporary art world is not the universe, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Paulo?
I think having a constant concern in my practice as a curator on, let's say, a time-based feeling of what meaning the things we do in art can have. I would say in the past few years in Brazil, we have been with the necessity of warning about the dangers, then the necessity of resisting, but also of mourning, of finding space to mourn the battles we had already lost. And to me, right now, it's a moment in history that we deal. Power has never, ever been so concentrated in the history of mankind. So,
Not only in Brazil.
No, everywhere. So, how much more power one person can have compared to all other people has never been, even when people could behave as emissaries of gods or gods themselves, they actually didn't have so much more access to information, protocols, algorithms, law enforcement, and capital itself. And so we are facing something that makes we, the majority, the owners or the ones who are carrying minoritary paradigms of how life can be lived on. So to me, from the institution we are working on, the key urgency is to build connections between different minoritary paradigms of how to deal with culture, with memory, with territory, with environment, so that at least one can acknowledge the other and perhaps build alliances and their own way of sharing not only knowledge, but we always speak about, when we talk about generosity, we speak about how to share what you don't really need. So take what you need, and whatever is left, you can share. But there's also the possibility of sharing hunger, sharing lackingness, sharing not because you have so much, but sharing because it's the only ethical possibility. And working with artists and communities and leaderships that we have been connecting the past few years, we have learned a lot about that, and we can acknowledge our own role as connectors, because often these paradigms are context-based and have very few opportunities of reaching out to each other.
But this connection is, I think, is also very important. And I think, I mean, I'm 20 years now in Asia, and just a little history. I would say one really important point for Asia was in 2002, and that's almost 23 years ago. Hanru and Charles Ash did a biennial in Guangzhou, and it was called Pause. And for that biennial, they actually invited all the smaller art spaces from all over Asia, gave them a space that was the same size of their art space in any country, and made a biennial out of it. And it was the initial point of the connections of Asian art spaces. A lot of friendships and connections and so on came out of that. And I profited from it, many others. I think we all profited from it. Then we had like 10 years of a lot of connections and connections. I feel, and maybe Joselina can talk to that, I think it got a little bit more quiet with these connections. I mean, maybe it is because we have all these art fairs now, and we meet each other on the art fairs, but I kind of, what happened to the, the old kind of conferences, meetings, where people would come together and connect and build something new?
still didn't exist at that moment. So, but I mean, I am aware of those moments of connections, and that moment when Asia was sort of gelling together and creating all of these connections across space and time, actually. And and I think this were like, I mean, to go further in history, since you started in 2002, I mean, we start speaking earlier to 1998, 97, when Singapore Art Museum started collecting, and then Asia Pacific Triennial in Queensland, in Brisbane, started looking at the production of Asia. And I guess that sort of becomes a prehistory to these connections that began. But when you say it turned quiet, I wonder if it, because there was a moment when there was the crash, the economic crash in 2008, and I guess that lessened the capacities of many spaces, cultural spaces. It's always a challenge to actually figure out where funding comes from. And that's why these opportunities like these ones are very important, because then we create sort of networks, or we renew old networks that we've not had a chance to do in like a year, and then we triangulate with new spaces and new connections. But that, I think, is what happened. That was the crash. And then I think there was another upturn, like maybe 7-8 years after 2002, a pause in Gwangju. But I mean, it was in Joan's talk, there was the Havana Biennial, and you mentioned Santi Bose. And those are very important moments as well, because these are a part of historical, of institutional history in the Philippines. Because these were moments when sort of globalism started entering artistic practice. And you're correct, there was this refusal out of the white cube. But I mean, prehistory to that was, of course, there's the CCP, and it becomes more complex. But yes, so I think that was a moment, but then it gets picked up soon after, I guess.
I kind of include that question with the question we got from the public for Arin. How do you use your artistic practice, which is quite speculative and speculative research? Can I say that, or is that really bad? But I mean, it's very open, very informed, but also there's a certain story there. But how do you use that to then do a biennial, which is, I mean, the Thai biennial, I was in Shanghai last year, it's big, it's not a room or not in a museum, it's in different rooms all over the cities, and I don't know how you do bouquet, but the Thai biennial is probably financially and production-wise one of the major biennials we have in Asia. So how do you use your artistic practice and then make something so tangible out of it?
Very difficult, but I had my idol here, sitting there, Luckily Tilao Nitcha. He was one of the artistic directors last time at Chiang Mai Biennial as well. I mean, like when we create something like artwork, no, and we kind of like an artist, and we make an artwork, and we have to have this perception of where our artwork is going to store, like in a museum, in some private collection, and so on and so on. That will be very difficult, because our vision is always goes to that direction, right? So I was not an artist who have this prevision on like putting my artwork in a museum or having my artwork in a private collection, that make this very easy. Because when I think about working on this biennial, I'm not thinking about to put my artwork or other artwork in the museum or in private collection, rather than the artwork that could effectively work by itself through communities, which is also related to my work as well. And that how it become not that difficult for me, that kind of thing. And yeah, and also what I thought of the question you gave to Jocelyn. When I was young, it was 2000, it was like 20, mid-20. And at that time, private institutions just collect art, right? Nowadays, a lot of private collections don't just collect art. For example, like this Tornado Art Foundation organized this such a great thing, talks about problems, politics, and so on, and also support artists. And we have more and more this kind of institution nowadays, which is different. And I hope that this kind of activities will connect each other, not just only private, also government as well. Yeah.
I mean, we are living in extraordinary times here in Southeast Asia at the moment. We have, I think, about 7 institutions under construction, right? I mean, we have Philippines, 3 in Bangkok, Bangladesh is opening, Machan is already there, and Singapore. So, but all of them are private. All of them are the private families. You live in a place where, you know, you have your institution, but a big one will come. Bangkok, again, there is currently, sorry to say, almost nothing, but there are 3 big institutions announced. How will that, and I have no idea, I'm sorry about the situation in Rio. But how does that change the thing? You know, how will it change it? Or how can we change it for the better? Maybe that's the more adequate. How can we make it, yeah.
I mean, we're all looking forward to all of these institutions coming up because it will obviously change the landscape. And obviously for the better, because of course it would have already built up on a huge amount of history and discourse and experience. And I mean, I don't want to know. I mean, I want to see how it unrolls. And I think it'll just, I think it will be quite interesting. It'll come out as, it will grow where it would, but hopefully not be able to, you know, sort of like go past the market, because I think the market is just too strong. And I mean, we are in Art Week Singapore. It's going to happen in a couple of days. But I do think it needs to be critiqued. And I hope these institutions that are coming out will have the opportunity to actually, or at least the space to be able to speak to this very overarching idea that seems to be overtaking all sorts of I mean, efforts. You know, it seems to keep on absorbing it. It's the neoliberal and capitalism in its worst space. So hopefully, all these spaces that are coming out will have the space we're in to think and see how are we going to position ourselves, not necessarily as a construct, as a binary to this, an opposition, but how will you work in a way that it sort of sets things right? I mean, right, I say in quotation marks. No?
And how to involve local communities? I mean, that's one of the questions.
Yeah, I think what should be desirable here and anywhere else as back home is we would expect that structures that are created in a more swift, fast, informal way compared to centenary institutions, or for them to be able to go beyond their own field in a more organic way. So Gala was saying there are institutions that were built, they had to be built on top of a scientific organization of knowledge with departments and materials and categories. And other kinds of organizations can be more organically created and managed in a way that can go in and beyond art and in and beyond the art system in a way that is vital for art to become, to conserve any sort of relevance. Because it's very, to me, very foreseeable that in a very short time, even before humanity ends up killing itself, to the sake of the planet, of course, but in a very short time, art can be in this kind of paradoxical situation that it is very, very, very important for very, very, very few people, and no one really cares a bit. No one really even knows or care to know. And to me, a key aspect of avoiding this kind of encapsulation is the ability of going beyond the art system itself. And in some cases, it depends on engaging with different disciplines of different knowledge, and in other cases, in connecting to grassroots and ground-based and context-based spaces and collaborators.
We are almost running out of time. Are there any questions in the audience? Yes, I know we have one or two here. Nothing? No personal questions? Oh, there's one. We need a microphone on the... What is it? Yeah, somebody's coming up. Thank you so much of breaking that.
I submitted one question that has to do with broad community engagement, basically suggesting the performing arts kind of have one up on the visual arts in that they've never lost this connection with audience engagement in terms of their thinking about how to engage. So just a question about, can the performing arts give us visual arts institutions some ideas, some strategies for deeper, broader community engagement? But the flip side question is there a role for the visual arts that's just highly elite or highly focused, concentrated on, say, key institutions or key decision makers? Because I feel like the reason why we're all here in the contemporary art world, I think, is because there's a method for doing things that artists are masters of, and that we feel that this is like a super productive thing that needs to be infused in society. But maybe that infusion needs to happen in very concentrated or specific contexts where key decisions are being made. So it's not a paean for contemporary art to go out into the world, but to go to specific locations, highly leveraged locations, and to convert people's mindsets there. So my question is, how do we think about institutions? Because I get it. Institutions are this place. The Marxist is not going to do it. So the institutions have to do it. But then how do institutions play this role?
On the top of my mind, I would disagree. I think it's the moment to understand that to put our energy into rhizomatic, nomadic, shiftable ways of inhabiting and connecting and evaluating places, communities, histories. Everything we can do against concentration is not enough, because concentration itself is making humanity very fragile to its own incongruences. So, but of course, this might not be strategic at all, but philosophically, humanistically, or politically, I would say so.
Maybe for the end, stealing Uta's question about how to put soul into the foundation. Any last words of advice, each of you? How do we put soul into the Tenato Art Foundation? Who wants to start on that one before we get to the performance?
I think for me it's very interesting because in the art world, especially in Thailand as well, I don't know if it's in the art world or in the contemporary art in Southeast Asia, where should, I mean, what is this kind of quality of solidarity? For example, like if everyone lost their job, and then who make them lost their job, right? So we had no idea, like, what will be this kind of quality that would bring this solidarity. That's why we talk about soul, which is pretty abstract for me, right? And most of the artists has been working under their kind of independent curator, independent artist, independent institution. Everything is independent. And then we face different kind of problems like economic, ecology, and so on and so on. And then there's no chance for me, in my opinion, right? There's no chance that I could imagine that people at the same time would get trouble in the same kind of problems and then bring their solidarity into this same kind of march. We don't have that. We did have that I think in 90s when they wanted to build this Bangkok Art and Cultural Center. Yeah. People, artists gathering together and protest against the government that we need this museum. But nowadays that museum is kind of, like, for what? Yeah. So I think the problem is, for me, the problem is not really like how to reach to that kind of quality of solidarity or how to gain that kind of soulful to build this kind of, like power. But it's more like who we are facing with, who we are, who make our life become more trouble and problems. And I would say capitalism. Yeah, that's the key. And I think we have one guy here, but he's not here. I met him. He's one of the most visited family in Thailand. And when I talked to him, so it's very easy if you wanted to do CSR project. You give money to your main clients, like Thai Beverage sell a lot of white liquor to white-collar people, laborers, workers, energy drinks. But then when they create this kind of fantastic exhibition, they gave it to middle-class people. I was like, oh, I aware that because through this, like capitalism history, 100 years, middle class become a better shield for capitalists to protect the power of the lower class people. So I think the most important for me is not just only ourselves as an artist or creator who bring our soul, but we need the supporter, the buyer, the creator, the owner of institution or whatsoever, who also have a very good conscience, and do something sincere. I think that would be enough to bring all the soul together and become solidarity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. As I said, it's actually the people, I think. But I wanted to use this, at least for Tanoto, because you're beginning and you're sort of like creating foundations and the groundwork towards whatever the organization will be in the next 5, whatever it's going to take form. But I wanted to quote, to sort of steal this idea, and I think I've been thinking about it quite a lot recently since I heard it from Candace Hopkins, where she said that when they do their projects, they always work at the speed of trust. And I think that's super important, to work with people who you trust. And the sort of trust that happens amongst your team is something that is, at the end, is the one that speaks, is how the institution will speak at the end. And so I think that's how I would leave.
Paulo, famous last words.
I think I would say something regarding duration, like the time spent, the time spent and the time that will be lived through, because I think there are so many contexts that share a sense of instability, of things that begin and are, before they are properly matured, they are interrupted, and even this country is so young. So I think to imagine that in 20 years, if the foundation is alive and kicking and connecting, it will have such a large percentage of the whole country age. Like Singapore will be like 80 and the foundation will be 20. So it's, you know, it's a very strong, it's a very strong sense of duration. And by working mostly in South America, but going to Europe from now and then, it's interesting to see the different perspectives about what is eternal, what is forever, and what is the now. And I think it's a very beautiful part of building structures and networks. It's to be able to see them grow or change throughout the time.
Good. So we started with time, we ended with time. Time is up. Thanks so much for listening to us. It was a great pleasure sitting here, and I give over to...
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you very much for the wonderful advice. We're arriving the last period of our day. You will be expecting a very poetic performance, lecture performance by New York-based Chinese artist Chang Yuchen. I first encountered work with Yuchen's this particular work during a studio visit with her in New York, where she was doing a residency at Smack Mellon, also a non-for-profit artist institution, small institution, but I have supported artists over a very long period of time. I was very, very touched by the way that Yuchen approached her journey to a small island where she encountered these corals at the shore and in the ocean. The shape of the coral immediately caught her attention, and she started to imagine different words and meanings that these corals might wanted to express to her, even though they might not speak the same language as she was in this foreign island. From that journey, she came back and hand draw all these different corals that she collected and create a new system of language and a dictionary based on the coral. Through this work, she's able to consider, you know, the identity, cultural influence, and a diasporic experience by almost fluidly and poetically letting herself immersed in these different ways of imagination. With that said, we're gonna start a performance. Yeah, thank you.
Never been so empty before. breathing with my upper body, rapid horizontal wind, and with my legs, streams of water, some warmer than others. And I felt with my gut the formation of unknown power, as if some immense and formidable creature was about to emerge from the black water, as if I was some immense and formidable creature. I wrote in my diary that evening in a state of trance. Cinema is a secular version of lightning. Next morning was my second swim, and I saw corals for the first time. I was intimidated by their tortures and prickly shade, their layered and compounded organization, their dim yet wild color. And perhaps they have also emitted chemical signals, for I received a clear message that I should have been. I was intruding. I thought of the description of Dragon King's palace in Chinese folktales, such as Miyada or Yuchen. Now with what I see, it's only natural to speculate deep down into that darkness, majestic and luminous establishments, unfathomable human beings. Pomuka, surface, derived from muka, which means face. Loud, 大海, the sea. The sea is horizontal and immersive and contains many tides and currents. Alun means wave, and in Malay, to repeat the word twice makes it plural. I draw a shadow to mimic the sonic repetition. Alun, waves. Morning is AM, the upper half of the day. A day is a cycle, a unit, and a form of completion. The surface of the sea waves in the beginning of a day. Later that day, Kani asked if I would like to see sunset from the other side of the island. We walked across a dense layer of trees, vines, and tall grasses. Then we were facing the west, agitated by a band of giant rocks. The ocean waves of this shore seemed more dramatic, bathed in an insanely neon-looking orange ray. I realized that the beach we were standing on were covered by corals. But unlike those that I saw earlier underwater, these corals had been bleached by the sun, dehydrated by wind, fragmented by tide. I couldn't help but bending down and picking up one and two and more. I felt something when I held them in my hand, and for the lack of a better word, I felt I could understand. I forgot to look up at the great drama of falling. It was almost pitch dark when Kani told me we should head back. I spent the next day appreciating my find in the form of drawing, in order to look at them close enough and for long enough. Is it calcification? The surface of the corals respond to light in such a contained manner. Reminds me of the plaster statues that I drew over and over as a kid. And perhaps it is a physical transformation that happened so slowly, left with corals, a hint of extended period of time, both before and after this moment we share, not unlike forever. I started to collect fragments of coral bodies every day, and as it turned out, Dinawa is a reef. As I lay out my harvest in front of my living space, and I began to organize my growing collection into growing categories. Those with 1 hose, with 2 hose, with 3 hose. Those looks like tree branches, like flames, like snowflakes, those that are blue. Ba gai, as if is a lump of ambiguity. The possibility is still in formation. Dia is third-person pronoun. It's a singular subject. Negation, dak, it turns its back on us. To hear is a year. And if I turn a third-person pronoun horizontally, at the bottom it means me, on top is you, as the bottom of a page is closer to the one who's reading and writing. So you and me are interchangeable, depending on who's speaking. And placing me underneath a noun makes it my calling, as if he didn't hear my calling. There was a boat shuffling in between Pulau Dinawa and Kota Kinabalu. One day I boarded the boat with a shopping list including pencils, SIM cards, and instant coffee. And shockingly, I observed every taxi driver I encountered was listening to a radio station of a different language: English, Malay, Cantonese, Tianmo, among others. After asking where I was from, a driver told me that he went to a Mandarin-speaking elementary school because he was close to home. And when his younger sister reached the age for school, their family had moved. His sister went to the school that was closer to the new home and was educated in English. Neither of these 2 languages was what they speak at home, Bahasa Melayu, and neither of these 2 languages was what he used in this conversation he had with me, English. In a bookstore located in a shopping mall, I stumbled upon a dictionary, Kamus Sari, 统一标准马来语词典, first published in 1973, and I was holding the 4th edition, reissued in 2018. Edited and published by and for Chinese diaspora in Malaysia. Browsing quickly from page to page, I noticed the sentences used here as examples are utterly vivid. Feeling confusingly emotional, my heart began pounding. I know this life. Although I have just arrived in this country for 2 weeks, but the short stories encapsulated in each example sentence and the memory and the meaning that they weave spoke to me. For example, Kita Barangha di Tempat yang Bengala Ing. We rest at a place that's windy. It's a scenario that has never happened to my past life experience. In the places I've lived, Northern China and Northern America, a windy place is never a restful place. But the heat on the island was so overwhelming. Only when there's a breeze, one can exhale and relax. Or, Nalayang selalu huja di laut. Fishermen often get caught in the sea by the rain. With foolish confidence and optimism, I went kayaking on a cloudy afternoon, and not long after, it started to rain. Tiny dots and circles evenly and completely filled my visual landscape. water in various forms enveloped me. I looked around with a little joy, a little fear, an indescribable hollow feeling. But now I see it printed in a dictionary. That moment is no longer indescribable or isolated. I can imagine all the people who have used this expression in the past and future. I can imagine a community. Rakhine people related to the third-person pronoun, which is a cylinder, while these details suggest multiplicity. Race is a community with a common root. Connect or communicate, it is performative and excited. With, by, for, a preposition. A preposition is a tool. It functions like a wrench. Language. Language is big and complicated, and it is moving with all its parts interrelated, and it overflows, exceeds its own boundary, so the shape is mutating. Nationality, on the contrary, has defined boundaries. People of various race communicate via national language. Ancient as oral language, and spoken by 290 million people across Southeast Asia. Bahasa Malayu never had its own script. It was spelled with Pallava and Kawi, originated in South India. Rencong originated in Sumatra, and Jawi, derived from Arabic alphabet. In 1904, British colonial administrator Richard James Wilkinson launched Wilkinson spelling with Roman letters, which became the official spelling system widely used in all British colonies in Malaya, Singapore, and Borneo. Malaysia declared independence in 1957, and in 1972, New Rumi spelling was officially announced. The interior of Malay language. Malayu has incorporated vocabularies from English, those related to economy, law, commerce, and politics. Sanskrit, those related to abstract concepts, as well as from Hokkien, Cantonese, Hakka. The exterior of Malayu. The incredibly diverse Malaysia seems to have multiple literacies activated simultaneously. Wherever I see Malay, I most likely would also see English and Mandarin Chinese next to it. And everyone that I talk to in Kota Kinabalu operates 2 to 3 languages or dialects, some even more. The gaps in between different syntax systems are rendered often seamlessly with patient smiles, collaborative nodding, and shared living experience. Chuba, please, both hands facing out, is a gesture of offering and invitation. Lihat, look, with both eyes. Bayang bayang is shadow or shade. Bayang bayang is intrinsically plural, because if there is a shadow, there is also an object. Bayang bayang is not 2 shadows. And the shadow is like us, but slightly distorted. Your selfhood. Self is related to subjectivity, hence also a cylinder, but a self is more detailed. Inside, the concept of the inside depends on the existence of the outside and the outline that it defines. Mirror is a reflective surface. Please look at your own reflection inside the mirror. One evening, Connie came by my window to chat with me. After hearing what I had been learning, Connie told me that during Japanese occupation, schools in Malaysia were only allowed to teach Japanese. I said the same thing happened in Northeast China, Manchuria. Connie said, if they stayed, now we talk in Japanese. I said, I think that was a plan. However, now we talk in English. What does that say about us now? Connie speaks English very well. Still, we both have moments when we fail to find the right word or put words in the right order. But communication doesn't break during those silent pauses. We share the effort in those moments. We accompany each other through the forest of unknown vocabulary and grammar. It occurred to me much later. In fact, in early 20th century, many progressive left-wing Chinese intellectuals such as Lu Xun, Qian Xuantong, Qu Qiubai wanted to Romanize Chinese language. For one, it's too complicated, therefore privileged. Two, it's not phonetic. Three, it's decadent from feudal society, not compatible with Western science and technology. In the word of Lu Xun, 汉字也是中国劳苦大众身上的一个结合，病菌都潜伏在里面。倘不先除去它，结果只有自己死。Fueled by proletarian internationalism and a painful desire for modernity, Chinese characters were condemned as disease, as defective currency, as dead bodies, and people who hold on to them as 骸骨迷恋, corpse fetish. This movement did not succeed. Although Chinese writing has been greatly simplified in mainland China and Pinyin, a romanization system, has been nationally implemented for decades, Chinese characters are far from being discarded. In 2020, amidst the pandemic, a protest bursted out in Inner Mongolia, caused by a curriculum reform imposed on ethnic schools by China's Inner Mongolia Department of Education, which replaced Mongolian with Standard Mandarin. Luka is injury. It could be caused by a cut or tearing. Jinga, as a verb, it means both to stay and to leave. How can a word mean both to stay and to leave? This is how I understand it now. If this drawing is here, it is simply here. But if we all leave the room, this drawing stays behind. So the concept of staying only comes into existence when there's an act of departure, of leaving. So staying and leaving are two sides of one act. This coral has a forward-moving momentum, but it is also anchored to stay. Scar, different from injury, which is a negative shape. Scar is more tissues coming to mend and repair. It is more but not less. It is a form of accumulation. Scar, bakat in Malay, also means talent. Both scar and talent are marks. For the last few days, I was on the island. The island entered its raining season. Every day it pours for an hour. Slowly, I combed through the dictionary and selected 182 sentences, and I began translating them one by one. For every sentence, I would learn each word. For every word, I would look through my entire collection of the choral bodies to find the exact match. Although I first set off to create a writing system for Bahasa Malayu, later on I realized that I am actually an interpreter for chorals. Their shapes, some drastic, some elegant. Their textures, some smooth, some porous, are already meaningful and expressive. Translation always goes both ways. Before my departure from the island, I left 7 sentences on the jetty. The jetty is a windy place. It is where the sailors, kitchen crew, and construction workers spend their leisure time, where they fish, listen to music, and play phone games. They are what's on my mind when I read.
Kepentingan mereka terabaikan. Perasaan ini agak abstrak, susah diterangkan. Pihak kerajaan mengacungkan kesihatan orang ramai. Minumlah air untuk
Could you please pass this on this way? Thank you.
Ketepikan ajaran yang ketinggalan. Kepalanya pening akibat terlalu lapar. Anak panah itu kena tepat pada alamat yang ditujui. Permukaan laut beralun-alun pagi hari. Kita berehat di tempat yang berangin. Tanah itu menganjur ke laut. Daun telinganya tergantung sepasang anting-anting. Mengapa budak ini tidak masuk sekolah? Getah asli menghadapi tentangan hebat daripada getah tiruan. Garam dapat mengawet makanan supaya tidak busuk. Bagaikan dia tak mendengar panggilanku. Kabus tebal telah hilang kerana matahari mula berbahagi. Jaga adikmu baik-baik. Luka itu meninggalkan bakat. Kerana kabus, puncak gunung itu berbalam. Surat saya tidak berbalas. Gajinya berbandingan dengan kecekapannya. Rakyat berbilang kaum berhubung dengan bahasa kebangsaan. Banyak bangunan tinggi di pusat bandar. Ada orang bantah, ada orang sokong cadangan itu. Dia tidur membantalkan lengannya. Barang ke mana anda pergi, saya boleh mendapatkan anda. Sebarang kerja saya mampu. Dia tidak melahirkan duka cita dalam batinnya. Cuba lihat bayang-bayang sendirimu di dalam cermin itu. Kelakuan membayangkan fikiran seseorang. Katanya dia hendak membebaskan rakyat yang tertindas. Ia selalu membela nasib orang miskin. Ia masih muda belia. Matahari terbenam di ufuk.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuchen. That was beautiful.